Nothing can stop us.
Gone for a minute, off for the rise. I can see all the hurt when it's up to the surface, reflecting your eyes. See you in person, problems confide. All I want is the truth. You keep telling me lies. Lie, 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 why you lie to me? Oh, lie, 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 why you lie to me? Oh, lie, 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 why you lie to me? You lie to me, oh, lie, 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 you lie to me.
Super Ghost Kamikaze attack! 5 men finish!
Oh, hey. Seems you caught me live in 4K about to take an ult to the face. The reason my attacks aren't doing anything is because of the other character's hyper armor, a lesser form of invincibility in the game that makes incoming attacks deal damage to stamina rather than health, and also makes them immune to grabs. Chances are pretty high that your first encounter with it came from an enemy starting an ultimate attack, since the majority of them have hyper armor until they've finished. Some ultimate attacks have hyper armor for much shorter time than others though, especially when they're faster attacks like Goku's ×4 Kaioken or Black's Kamehameha, and some don't have any at all. Strike ultimates are usually guilty of this, like the first stage of Goku's Dragon Fist, Trunks' Burning Strike, Hit's Time Skip Molotov, the entirety of Cabba's Impulse Slash after the first punch, and Orange Piccolo's Apocalyptic Burst. Some Ki Blast ultimates can be equally guilty though, like Majin Buu's Angry Explosion, which has armor as it starts, but completely loses its protection the instant the actual attack comes out. DBS Gogeta's Meteor Explosion completely lacks any at all, and God of Destruction Toppo's Destructive Fission has some that barely lasts more than a second or two, even while the attack itself travels the stage. These ultimates can end up being interrupted by as little as a Ki Blast as a result, and are harder to use without setting up properly first. Ultimate attacks aren't the only skills that have hyper armor though. Some regular skills can grant it, like Goku's Spirit Bomb, Lord Beerus's God of Destruction's Rampage, Captain Ginyu's Fighting Pose F, and the startup of Nail's Do or Die. Most Awoken skills have hyper armor during their transformations too, and some are fast enough to activate that they can even be used defensively to push opponents away with their knockback effect or power through incoming attacks, especially if those attacks would leave an opponent wide open afterward. Not all Awoken skills can be used that way though, and still others might take too long to actually activate, which would leave the transforming character wide open instead. It's worth mentioning that it's still affected by hit stun, even if no obvious damage is being dealt. That means that attacking an opponent who has hyper armor will delay whatever move they're using that would grant it, and therefore make the armor active for longer. The more rapid the hits come and the more hit stun they have, the longer the delay. This is something most noticeable when attacking an opponent while they're firing an ultimate attack, like when multiple players are attacking a raid boss at the same time. As mentioned before, hyper armor isn't true invincibility. It just converts health damage into stamina damage. It's the equivalent of using an attack while blocking at the same time. That means a character under its effect can still have their stamina broken if they take a sufficiently strong attack. A charged heavy attack or a reversed aura burst dash will break through hyper armor in the same way they can shatter an opponent's guard. Some skills will naturally break through hyper armor as well, and at the time of this video, they include the Ki Blast input of GT Goku's Scissors Paper Rock, a fully charged sledgehammer, Nappa's Arm Crash, the right directional input of Captain Ginyu's Ginyu Force Special Combo, Cooler's Shadow Crusher, a raid boss Marbling Drop, and DBS Broly's fully charged Gigantic Charge. Ultra Instinct Sign Goku's Divine Kamehameha straight up ignores it, and the first stage of Fuse Remote Sirius Bomb ignores it as well, to the point that both simply override it rather than break it. A fully charged Apocalyptic Burst also breaks through hyper armor, and it's the only ultimate attack capable of doing so. There's even an evasive skill that breaks through it, Super Buu's Dimension Cannon, though that comes at the cost of being expensive and offering very little protection for an evasive skill. Finally, any attack can break through a character's hyper armor if their stamina is low enough when they're attacked. This adds an element of danger to using awoken skills or ultimate attacks just for the armor, as even those won't help out if there isn't any stamina to sustain it. Captain Ginyu's fighting pose F in particular drastically boosts the amount of stamina damage its user takes, making it extremely vulnerable to stamina damage taken. A similar effect happens when a Namekian becomes giant, as they gain a unique form of hyper armor that can't be broken through by the skills mentioned before, but will still take stamina damage. But that likely has way more to do with being too large for most of those moves to actually reach.
Since none of us has a Namekian, we had a Switch friend of mine use the one he made. Thanks, Cujo.
Super armor is the other lesser form of invincibility. It's different from hyper armor in that characters under its effect still receive damage to their health and they can still be grabbed. However, characters under the effect are still immune to most status ailments like burning, freezing, paralysis, sleeping, blindness, staggering, and petrification. Being slowed or poisoned is still possible though, as well as being turned into candy. For the most part, your only experience with super armor will come from you, or another player activating it with a limit burst, which adds a damage reduction effect as well. Otherwise, only 2 ultimate attacks in the game have this armor, and they are Goku's Super Spirit Bomb and Trunks' Sword of Hope. Some regular skills have super armor as well, and at the time of this video, those are Hercule's Rolling Hercule Punch, Android 16's Rocket Tackle, Tien's Tri-Beam, Ice Shenron's Ice Field, Nova Shenron's Burst Reflection, Blue Vegeta's Counterburst when it activates, Turles' Fruit of the Tree of Might, and Frieza's Emperor's Sign. Further differentiating from hyper armor is the fact that super armor can be applied to a character and still let them continue fighting as normal rather than only existing during a particular move. And since an armored opponent can't be knocked around or stunned in any way, many characters' combos stop working due to having no knockback to teleport for and no stunning effect to finish their combos with, making it impossible to fight normally. It's the reason why players often consider use of it unfair, as it forces a character to do one of 2 things in the majority of cases: run away and go on the defense or grab. However, just like a character using super armor can still be grabbed, they are likewise still vulnerable to skills that function as grabs, known as command grabs. These are skills that, once they make contact, cannot be escaped until the damage has been dealt. Often they are unblockable, making them safe to use at any time, but there are some that can be blocked even by an opponent with super armor active. At the time of this video, these skills include Goku's Super God Fist, Hit's Time Skip Flash Skewer, Blue Vegeto's Savage Strike, DBS Broly's Uncharged Gigantic Charge, God Vegeta's Raid Blast Forward Input, Toppo's Destructive Fracture, Gamma-2's Gamma Impact, Majin Buu's Innocence Cannon, and DBS 18's Steel Mirage. The command grab ultimate attacks that can be blocked include Goku's Dragon Fist, Time Skip Molotov, Burning Strike, the semi-final hit of Rosie Black's Divine Lasso, an uncharged Apocalyptic Burst, Meteor Explosion, and the forward input of Beast Gohorn's Special Beam Cannon. Vidal's Festival Eagle Kick is the only evasive skill that shares that criteria. Command grabs at the time of this video that can't be blocked and will therefore always work against an opponent with super armor include Drain Charge, Hyper Drain, Android 17 and 18's Super Drain, Hit's Time Skip Backbreaker and Jump Spike, DBS Broly's Fully Charged Gigantic Charge and Gigantic Rage, Ultra Instinct Sign Goku's Ultrasonic Blitz, Orange Piccolo's Demonic Destruction, Frieza's Death Psycho Bomb, Lord Slug's Darkness Rush both melee and ranged, Gamma-2's Core Breaker, a fully charged Apocalyptic Burst, the first stage of Fu's Remote Serious Bomb, and Dispo's Circle Flash. Hit's Time Skip Tremor Pulse, is the only evasive skill that is both a command grab and unblockable, and Captain Ginyu's body change ignores super armor entirely. Before we move on to the last part of this segment, there's one character worth mentioning when it comes to super armor itself, DBS Broly. He is the only character in the game at the time of this video who has super armor during all 3 of his super attacks, and he's unique for it, in that only he has it. Created characters using his skills don't gain any armor, effectively meaning he will almost always use his skills uninterrupted, unless an opponent is fast enough to grab him first. A very unlikely task, since he's also the largest character in the game, and will therefore tend to outgrab the entire roster. The final detail to remember is that super armor still takes damage to health. This means that most skills can still continue to damage armored opponents as normal, especially if the opponent uses a move that would leave them open to attack. Limit bursts generally happen when someone is on the verge of being knocked out, so a strong attack could still KO an armored opponent anyway if their health is low enough. Skills that travel straight to or chase a target are especially useful in that scenario. Naturally, this means that all these potential drawbacks also apply to you.
I got what you want, I got what you need.
Barriers are all sorts of energy fields and force fields that protect you from incoming attacks. They mainly guard against ki blast attacks, but some can also hit opponents if they're close enough to the barrier. Starting from the base game, the 4 true barriers come as evasive skills. Those are Perfect Cell's Energy Barrier, Android 17's Energy Field, Vegeto's Force Shield, and Future Gohan's Energy Dome. I've called them true barriers because they're the only ones that can be kept up for longer by spending ki. Of the true barriers, Energy Barrier is the most offensive of the 4, having one of the largest radiuses and dealing the most damage. It comes out as a pretty big purple dome that shoves nearby opponents back, staying up when the input is held. It's also the only one of them whose knockback can start or extend a combo. What makes it the least effective defensively, though, is that unlike the others, it doesn't actually have protection at its center, nor does it cancel out many attacks. So, attacks that are large enough can beat past it to damage the user anyway, especially when the attacks are launched point blank. It has the 3rd fastest ki drain of the barriers, and since it costs 3 bars of stamina to use on top of that, it's one of the worst barriers and evasive skills in the game. Energy Field has a medium radius, but ties for dealing the least amount of damage. It comes out as a green, energy field that pushes opponents back a short distance and completely protects its user from damage, lingering when the input is held. It's much more effective defensively, as its user will still be protected, even if they appear to be moved outside the field, and costs only 2 bars of stamina to use, but has the 2nd fastest ki drain of the barriers. Force Shield has the smallest radius and ties with Energy Field for dealing the least amount of damage. It comes out as a tight blue energy bubble that knocks opponents away at a high angle and completely protects its user from damage, lingering when the input is held. It's overall less effective both defensively and offensively, since it has the fastest ki drain of the barriers with the smallest range, but it does cost only 2 bars of stamina to use. Energy Dome has a slightly larger than medium radius at first, but it's the first of the barriers, and the only one of the true barriers that can expand with additional input to become the largest in the game. It's also the only one of the true barriers that doesn't deal damage until the additional input, where it's only slightly stronger than Energy and Force Shield. It comes out as a transparent green bubble that pushes opponents away a medium distance, lingering when the input is held. Defensively, it can be very effective since it has the slowest ki drain of the barriers and the largest radius, but it costs 3 bars of stamina to use and can take the longest to finish. Barriers also come as regular skills, but since they can't be kept up with ki, they often deal much higher damage or have secondary effects to compensate. And since they aren't evasive skills, They can't be used to stop an attack while it's happening. They have to be used before an attack actually reaches them, so they require good timing or the opportunity to create them first, which makes them harder to use. And most importantly, compared to the true barriers, they tend to be much weaker defensively. Coming from the base game are Nova Shenron's Burst Reflection, Blue Vegeta's Counterburst, Janemba's Dimensional Hole, Lord Slug's Darkness Twin Star, Spirit Boost, and Super 17's Drain Field. DLCs later on introduced DBS 17's Rough Ranger, Bojack's Psycho Barrier, Blue Gogeta's Punisher Shield, Tapion's Hero's Flute, and GT Vegeta's Shield Barrier. Burst Reflection creates a barrier in front of its user for about 2 seconds before firing a one-hit stream of fire that staggers opponents and opens them up to a combo when close enough. While the barrier is up, it cancels out incoming ki blasts if they're weak enough, but it doesn't cancel harder-hitting blasts, and the user will still take full damage. Naturally, this means it's not great against ultimate attacks either. It can't be cancelled before firing, and it can't fire early, so it leaves its user more vulnerable than not because of how long it takes and its lack of both range and accuracy. Counterburst erects a small energy shield directly in front of its user for about a second. Incoming ki blasts and ki blast skills are cancelled out, and once they make contact with the shield, the user responds with a single energy blast that hits 6 times and can start a combo thanks to its quickness. The blast itself is strong enough to keep cancelling out incoming blasts on its own, even from some ultimate attacks, but it doesn't hold up so well against continuous beams. For a very brief moment after it activates, the user is immune to damage. Dimensional Hole is probably the most inefficient barrier in the game. It creates a sort of space barrier that only responds to a basic ki blast, causing a one-hit explosion behind an opponent that sends them flying towards the user for a combo. Basic ki blasts are all that it responds to, though, as even a charged basic blast will just punch right through. The explosion itself is also slow and very easy to avoid, appearing at such a precise location that it can be dodged just by moving the slightest distance backward. Darkness Twin Star just looks like 2 energy balls surrounding its user at first, but a closer look at it reveals that it has a thin barrier surrounding them too. Contact can be made twice with it before it fades, and it blocks basic ki blasts and most strike skills while active. Armored opponents can push through it anyway though, and many ki blast skills can overpower it. It might have had potential use for closing in for a combo, but there are probably better moves for that. Spirit Boost isn't a barrier or shield, and is instead just raw energy that cancels out almost any incoming ki blast while it's active, even if it were an ultimate attack. It's the first of its kind in the game to not consume any ki, and while it doesn't last long, its effect is still potent enough that another can be used even against rapid-fire attacks. It can't stop explosions that start on top of its user though, nor can it stop Gigantic Roar. Drain Field is the only barrier in the game that absorbs incoming blasts to convert them into ki for its user instead. It's also the second after Spirit Boost that doesn't use ki. Against beams, it cancels them outright, but treats them as a single absorption. Against individual blasts, it seems to do its best, racking up ki the more it continues to absorb. It can be held for up to 5 seconds, but can be dropped earlier if the input isn't held. How much of an attack it cancels and how much ki it restores depends heavily on the attack, to the point that we figure it's just an outdated skill by now. Rough Ranger has the user enter a stance, and if hit during it, it reacts with a kick or a barrier depending on how close the opponent is, regardless of the type of attack. Its barrier is one of the strongest in the game, defending against all attacks and stays up for 4 seconds or until physical contact is made with the barrier. Even armored attacks will fail against it once it starts, but during the actual barrier itself, it can be forced through. It makes its user immune to damage for a moment as it responds. Psycho Barrier is one of the strongest barriers in the game, both in terms of its offense and defense. It can be input up to 3 additional times, expanding the barrier's size and continuing to damage opponents with each pulse. It can cancel out even ultimate attacks, but armored opponents can breach it. Punisher Shield sets an energy shield in front of its user that blocks ki blasts and damages opponents touching it. If a ki blast makes contact with the shield, it returns fire with a blast of its own, and its user teleports behind the opponent to kick them down. If an opponent makes contact with the shield, they'll be stunned for the kick to deliver. But if the shield had already been out for a bit, and a ki blast makes contact with the shield, only the return fire will happen. And if an opponent makes contact with it after it had already been out, they'll just be stunned. Hero's Flute doubles as both a barrier and an assist skill that protects its user and shares a boost effect to allies at the same time. Once it's up, it blocks all attacks that aren't ultimate attacks and knocks back opponents who touch it. A single hit from an ultimate will force it down, and the rest of the hits, if they have any, will hit as normal. It can still be beaten out by attacks with persistent armor that would push into the barrier to reach the user, and some unblockable attacks like Special Beam Cannon will completely override it as well. Shield Barrier is the only barrier aside from Darkness Twin Star that stays up passively and lets its user function as normal. It erects a yellow barrier that stays up for 15 seconds, blocking most ki blast attacks that aren't ultimate attacks. Those will just ignore it. If its user is attacked by any means while it's up, it'll fade away. One really cute trick to larger barriers is that they can be used close to an ally so that they can be protected too. But as we've seen, there's all sorts of them in the game, so I want to know which one's your favorite in the comments.
Invincibility is what happens when you want to stop following the rules of the game. More often than not, it comes as a movement of some kind and is only active for a short time, but even that can make a world of a difference. There are only about 13 skills in the entire game that grant invincibility as part of their explicit function, though some have existed before they ended up getting their invincibility reduced or removed entirely. Evil Whirlwind and by association All Clear are both attacks that can be used while guarding. When they're used while guarding, the user is invincible as they attack, a lot like evasive skills. In that regard, they're pretty free to use so long as you've got the key, but they have a long enough startup time between themselves that they can be avoided if an opponent sees them starting. Evil Whirlwind seems to have a slightly longer period of invincibility during the attack though. Evil Flight Strike is exclusive to Namekians and Majins, since it involves becoming an inflatable wacky tube man to attack. For a moment as they rise while flailing their stretchy arms, they're invincible. Fake Death has a very brief window of invincibility as its user falls, having been nerfed from grinning enough of it that players could often spam it. It can be held for up to 8 seconds, and the leap back up will stun an opponent for long enough that it can start a combo. If the leap up had any invincibility back then, either it doesn't now, its recovery speed was nerfed, or both. Explosive Boo Boo Punch is exclusive to Majins, seeing them leap up for a moment and unleash a rain of punches below themselves. It has a bit of invincibility at the startup. Eagle Kick has a very brief moment of invincibility as it starts, which makes it a threatening skill in a straight up fight thanks to how quickly it comes out. Rolling Hercule Punch has invincibility on each roll, or near total invincibility if rapidly using the 3 rolls together.
Shadow Crusher has invincibility once it's triggered,
Dashing towards target without issue until it reaches and punches them. Endless Shoot has a strong amount of invincibility during the step backwards before shooting, making it pretty good for switching up an offense. Total Detonation Ball has invincibility for the instant it rises, so the closer its user already is to the ceiling, the less it can offer protection, and at that rate it might as well not even have protection at all. It's best used away from the ceiling. Super Guard is just pure invincibility in a bubble, completely avoiding any and all harm no matter what it was. They can still be moved though, best observed against an armored opponent. It works a lot like the True Barrier Step talked about before, gradually reducing up to 3 bars of ki during its use. Backflip is a quick, backflip that has invincibility during it. Inputting it during the first backflip will perform 2 more backflips, but neither of those have invincibility at all, and is therefore a good way to get clapped for doing a cool trick. In theory, you could use it outside of the range of danger to look like you're dodging things in a flashy way, but really you can just be chased down regardless or shot out of the flips for your trouble. Super Explosive Wave's backward input results in a similarly invincible backflip away before firing. Wall of Defense is the other pure invincibility skill aside from Super Guard that has its user teleport in front of an ally and spread themselves, becoming invincible for up to 3 seconds. But since it has a recovery animation afterward, you can still get backhanded for your effort at being a hero. Any skill that involves teleporting or warping in any way is inherently invincible during that movement, since there is no way to hit someone who's no longer there. They can be okay for launching a counterattack or dodging. Evasive skills all offer invincibility as protection, with the difference only being in for how long the invincibility lasts, which usually depends on the animation. So while something like Instant Rise might only cost 2 bars of stamina and finish quickly, that could be a flaw against attacks with many hits since they could force repeated use of quicker evasive skills, which is where longer lasting evasive skills come in. Something like Energy Field or Punisher Guard could eat attacks for days, but they're far less useful in the heat of battle against a physically aggressive opponent who could just start another assault the moment the protection ends. Most back hits have just a very brief window of invincibility, best observed when someone keeps vanishing to attack, only to keep getting backhanded anyway. Steps also have invincibility, but only during the movement itself and only when stepping away from a target, such as directly away from them or just to the side. Stepping too early or too late won't offer any protection, but stepping just right will ensure that at least one attack misses. You can see in this shot here that stepping back did not move me out of the path of the crush stream thrown at me, meaning it just flew right through me as I stepped. When a character is recovering from having been attacked, they have invincibility until they've gotten back onto their balance. You can see it most often after Ki Blast sends someone into a tumble, or when an attack is used too late after a knockback. The same goes for when they're recovering from being knocked down. There's even a bit of invincibility just from jumping off of the ground, though it doesn't last past the very beginning. Grabs and command grabs make both fighters invincible to all outside attacks, which is why no one likes when raid teammates use command grabs and regular grabs on bosses. Dual ultimates have the same effect, since they all begin as blockable command grabs anyway. Aura burst dashers completely ignore any and all Ki Blast attacks while they're happening, up to and until they reach their target to stop. In the majority of cases, they'll completely ignore whatever blast is coming out and still break you. Some attacks keep going anyway once they're out though, and you won't be invincible to those. Melee attacks and strike skills will still beat it as well. If attacked just as it begins, the transition into Ultra Instinct becomes invincible as it delivers its counterattacks and turns the user around in a cinematic animation. Just Guards also grant invincibility for a very brief moment, but we have a video on those already. Oh, right. There's one more thing to mention about invincibility. You know how DBS Broly has super armor exclusive to him on all 3 of the skills? Well, there's a character in the game who has invincibility exclusive to his combos. I give you Hercule, the man of men and the true Super Saiyan warrior. He has a very simple point during his combos that has him bob and weave, and when he does that, the man is completely invincible, and he goes on to attack anyway after that. And since he can cancel almost any part of his combo just by blocking, he can just press 2 buttons once again to get back to turning invincible, and he can always just rolling Hercule punch if he's in further doubt. So anyway, I don't think it's a good thing that of all the mechanics in the game we've talked about in this video, invincibility of all things ended up having the most to mention. It's secretly the reason it can be so frustrating to try and fight someone normally online, because lag and delay can make moments of invincibility seem perfectly timed to shut you down every time. You could be hitting an opponent, but if the delay is there, it can only register your hit once the opponent does a back hit, so by that time your connections finally matched each other, it only did so when they were invincible. The same goes for Vanish Step Spam and Steps, already 3 universal ways to fish for invincibility in the game.
It doesn't help that the game doesn't exactly tell people about these things either. Changes get made at any time, to the point that something that might have been common knowledge just a few months or a year ago can be completely false now.
We won't be surprised if you find that something works even a little bit differently later down the line, as we get more updates and DLCs.
What'll never be different, though, is how we feel about everyone who followed us this far. Thanks so much for watching!